The circle carries many connotations. A sign of perfection, a social group sharing similar interests, a portion that makes up infinity, etc. But it also carries another meaning in the form of a cyclical process, that no matter where you go, you'll always end up at the beginning. Faces may change as the years get added on, but the process always loops back around to the start. And sadly, that is way too accurate for the Uzumaki anime, which is what I'll be reviewing today. Adapted from the legendary author Junji Ito's manga of the same name, this anime adaptation was hyped up for years to finally be the one good anime adaptation of Junji Ito's work, after years and years of garbage. But when it finally released, after having a production schedule that lasted longer than most weekly anime, it turned out to be yet another crappy adaptation. And to think, I was more than willing to admit I ate crow if it turned out to be really good. I mean, I've done that before on the show with the Death and Return of Superman movies, for instance. But unfortunately, despite being given more than enough time to make this work, the anime adaptation of Uzumaki is garbage. The project was announced in 2019 and had no release date started. Then 2020 comes around, and it gets delayed to 2021. Then it gets delayed again to 2022, then 2023, and then it finally comes out. But enough time wasting. I'm gonna dive in and explain why I currently find this to be the worst Junji Ito adaptation so far. So, the story of Uzumaki revolves around Kirie, a high schooler going through her mundane life. But then everything changes when a supernatural phenomenon known as the Spiral Curse hits and turns her world upside down over the course of the 4-episode run, until she gives up and the curse finishes, completely erasing the city and allowing people to build a new one on the remains of the old, completely ignorant of the fact that the curse will one day strike again, and the result will be the same as before. Now, the story concept of the Spiral Curse is something that I do find interesting, and the escalation of how it affects people throughout the story is handled well. It starts with stuff like spirals in the river, then we get to the body horror that fans of Ito are similar with, the typhoons constantly hitting the city, to turning the city itself into one big spiral in the form of row houses. It's an escalation that slowly burns into your corneas as the series goes on. In the manga version, that is. The anime version hits the fast forward button on the pacing, or will just go all over the place when deciding what chapters to adapt. Whiplash. Fun! From the screen to the ring to the pen to the For instance, in episode 1 we get bits of the first chapter, then we cut to the beginning of the volume 2 story, The Snail, and then we cut to chapter 3 back in volume 1. Where's chapter 2? Oh, that's easy. It's in episode 3. Which actually creates a fucking mess in continuity, because at this point in the story they stopped doing cremation because of the Spiral Curse, and yet, when the relative of Kirie's boyfriend dies in this episode, she's cremated.
You fucking idiot!
This made sense in the manga because it happened in chapter 2 while the cremation ban was in chapter 7. In the anime, the ban happens in episode 2, so now it doesn't make any fucking sense for them to be cremating when episode 3 rolls around. So regardless of if you're an anime-only person or you read the manga first, this decision is just fucking confusing, and that's just the tip of the fucking iceberg. But, let's go back to episode 2. Here's how bad the pacing gets. We go from the story of the boy slowly turning into a snail, to two people in love hiding from their parents, to the guy stalking Kirie, to Kirie's hair turning into curls, back to the snail story again, then back to the hair shit, then back to the snail story for 5 seconds before we go back to the curls shit, then back to the snail story, then the couple story, then we get a story about a lighthouse causing people to walk in circles and also burns them at the end, and then we're back to the snail story before we finally stick with the lighthouse shit for the rest of the episode. Confused? Don't worry. So was I. Yeah, that's 5 fucking chapters turned into a 26-minute episode. Now normally, that's doable for a weekly manga with 14 pages to them. The punchline is that these chapters are around 40 fucking pages apiece. This is completely unacceptable. That's enough content for 5 episodes, not 1. What the fuck? And the way they're adapted all fucking scatterbrained and shit throughout these episodes feels like they did that to keep people's attention span from drifting away. What the fuck is this shit? Again, this project was in development longer than most weekly anime have for their production schedules. You mean to tell me they couldn't make more episodes to alleviate this issue? And I'm sure some will bring up the budget, but I'd like to remind you that the 2011 Hunter x Hunter anime had to stretch their fucking budget across 146 episodes, and they managed to not only make that shit look good, but also keep the pacing well structured. Actually, considering the multiple delays, I'm kind of wondering what the fuck they were doing with all this time if this is the end result. I mean, besides the higher-up pissing away the budget. 2 hours? Yeah, but these are the people responsible for crap like this happening who continue to get away with this shit while the animators and writers, the ones who actually fucking create, get thrown under the bus and treated as the proverbial scapegoat by these fucks. They decided for the anime to be handled in this direction. They decided to make it only 4 episodes. They decided to hire a studio that is only really known for in-between animation to completely animate some of these fucking episodes, and they are the ones who get the praise for projects succeeding, but conveniently are quick to hide or blame others for when their projects fail. Now, obviously, I am not incentivizing harassment. That shit is fucking cringe. But calling out their ass / pinning the blame on them is not harassment, as long as it doesn't go too far. Unfortunately, a lot of people tend to think harassment / death threats are the solution to these issues, but it only makes things worse, and it doesn't fix the core fucking problem. That is not holding these people accountable for these appalling work conditions, or in this case, the project getting treated poorly. And on that note, let's address the major elephant in the room, the animation. Now, Episode 1's animation isn't too bad, and I'm a sucker for rotoscopes, so that was a neat bonus, but the remaining episodes have very wonky or poor animation for the most part. Hell, Episode 4, the PNG of Kitty A's boyfriend and some random fuck getting pulled down to the bottom of the deep abyss. Are you fucking kidding me? Episode 2 is notorious for its awful animation, and that was the first episode done by Studio Akatsuki, the aforementioned studio that's only really known for in-between animation. And it looks not only bad from an anime perspective, but the fluidity is bad, the lighting for the characters and backgrounds are bad, etc. Now, I've heard people saying that animation ruins the show for them, and I get that. However, I don't blame the animators for that because they're the ones that got digged over by the higher-ups. However, for me, I think the animation is just mediocre across the board, regardless of if it's Studio Akatsuki or not. Even in the first episode, before the animation went to shit, as people would say, the animation was just meh outside of the rotoscoping for me. I know that animation is a big element in cartoons and anime, and a product having terrible animation is a detriment to the product's quality, but to me, it's not the only element that makes something good or bad. If Uzumaki's anime was good, the animation would be its weakest fucking element. The equivalent of this would be either Record of Ragnarok or Blue Lock's anime. Both suffer from the animation sucking ass, but it still has a lot of good elements from characters to storytelling and audio. It's just that the animation sucks ass. Hell, the opposite can also be damaging to the product, as shown with Tokyo Ghoul's first season, which looked fantastic, but everything else about it sucked ass. The problem I have with Uzumaki is not strictly the animation. The story, as I went over earlier, is a fucking mess here in terms of pacing, and that drags it down in terms of quality for me. So that's 2 elements this adaptation fails at, and unfortunately, it also carries over the issue I had with the manga, which is that the characters are flatter than a goddamn door frame. Well, but it's a horror anime. The important part isn't the characters, one might argue, and yeah, they're correct in that assessment. However, characters is also an element I review / judge when it comes to this shit, so I bring it up because of that. How's the horror then? Well, first, let's establish what the horror is. Uzumaki's horror relies on body horror, psychological horror, and gore. And surprisingly, despite the mediocre art style and animation at points, the horror still works well. It's genuinely scary, the gore isn't censored, thank fuck. The scenes in the hospital, for instance, where that one character is suffering from the mental effects of the curse, are genuinely terrifying to witness. So congratulations, anime. You got one thing right, by fucking up everything else. Speaking of, man, the soundtrack is just a lot of white noise. Nothing memorable or great, it just exists. Alright, let's just wrap this up. Overall, the anime is a fucking letdown. However, like I said earlier, my frustration is not at the people who animated or wrote this. It's at the higher-ups who didn't actually create shit and fucked over the production and the budget. So thanks. I hope you don't get harassed, but I do hope people give you critique instead of having the animators and writers be the fucking fall people yet again. And so ends yet another turn of the Junji Ito anime cycle. It's announced, people hype it up, hoping that this one will finally break free of the curse, comes out, and it ends up sucking. Maybe next time it'll be handled by higher-ups that know what they're doing, but I'm not gonna hold my fucking breath. Until then, I'm David Grimm, and thank you for watching.